Hello, this is the online module for estate and gift tax. I've called it Online Module 8A because I think this is about the 8th week of the semester. There will actually be one or two more parts to our online materials for this week. So, if you haven't already, please do the assigned reading just like you would for class, and these materials are designed to supplement that reading. Work through the materials and post an opinion on the discussion board. Please try to do this before we meet in class next time. In this set of materials, we will be talking about powers of appointment, and by the time you're done with these materials, you should be able to use terminology that relates to powers of appointment. You should also be able to explain when Section 2041 will include property subject to a power of appointment in the gross estate. You should be able to distinguish general powers of appointment from non-general powers of appointment. You should be able to identify those situations in which a decedent held a general power of appointment at death. And you should be able to explain how Section 2041 is different from 2038, which we've already talked about. Okay, so let's look at some of the terminology. We'll refer to a donor and a donee. The donor is the person who creates the power. Now, usually that's the person who established the trust, but not necessarily. So it's important to be clear that you're talking about the donor of the power as opposed to the person who contributed the property. The donee, then, is the person who gets the right to exercise the power. The donee of the power may not necessarily also receive a property interest. Okay, the object is the person that that you appoint something to, and sometimes not everybody can be an object of a power of appointment, so it's a permissible appointee. And notice that that means it's only a potential appointee. We actually need the donee of the power, the holder of the power, to exercise it in order for anyone to actually get anything. The taker in default is the backup plan. This is kind of like your contingent beneficiary when you're naming beneficiaries. It's the person who will take the property if the donee does not exercise the power. Okay, so make sure you can use the terms: the donor of a power of appointment, the donee of a power of appointment, the object, and the taker in default. Okay, so once there is a power of appointment, there are four things that could happen. The donee of the power, or the holder of the power, could exercise the power and say, okay, I say that so-and-so gets this property. The donee could do nothing. The donee could release the power. In other words, give it back. Say, I don't ever want to do this. I'm not going to exercise this, and so officially I'm giving up my right to do so. Or sometimes the power can lapse. Not all powers last forever. If the power has a time limit and it runs out, the power lapses. Exercise means the donee or the holder tells the trustee to distribute the property to someone. Or if it's a testamentary power of appointment, the donee includes a clause in a will that exercises the power. Or the donee could just do nothing, and the trustee follows the instructions in the trust. Now think about this. You've probably heard the saying, to do nothing is to do something, or not to choose is to choose. In a sense, if the donee does nothing, the donee is choosing the backup plan, or choosing the taker in default. Release, we talked about a little bit. It's like giving the power back to the trust. It's also kind of like exercising the power in favor of the trust, or in favor of the taker in default. And lapse, again, as I mentioned, is for powers that have a built-in deadline, that disappear after some period of time. If they're not exercised by a deadline, they just disappear. They lapse. And that means that the taker in default gets the property. Okay, so of these three things, in three of these scenarios, the taker in default ends up with the property. Lapse and release both end up in no more power, and taker in default takes the property. And so that means that in those cases, donee has chosen the taker in default. Nothing, doing nothing, means that donee has chosen the taker in default. Exercise means the donee actively chooses someone other than the taker in default. So we say that for tax purposes, lapse is equal to a release, and that's the same as exercise. Can you see why? In any of these circumstances, the donee of the power has made a permanent choice, either for the taker in default or for someone else. Okay, now what is actually a general power of appointment? Because that's what matters for Section 2041. A general power of appointment, and I know we've said this, means that the donee can appoint the property to self, creditors, donee's estate, or creditors of donee's estate. Think about this. If the donee can withdraw the property, that's a general power of appointment. Right? If you can withdraw the property, it means you could give it to anybody you want, including yourself, including your creditors. Crummy powers are general powers of appointment. We didn't really call them that, but think about it. If you have a right to withdraw property, you have a right to take it for yourself or your creditors. There's also a time limit on crummy powers, so those are powers that lapse if they're not exercised. And remember, we said that lapse equals release equals exercise. Not exercising the power is equivalent to withdrawing the funds and giving them back to the trust. And we'll come back to this a little bit later. Okay, so let's look at the tax consequences. Section 2041 has two main parts, and you should look at Section 2041. Never take my word for what a tax section says. Powers of appointment created before October 21st, 1942. The value of the gross estate shall include the value of all property. To the extent of any property with respect to which a general power of appointment created on or before October 21st, 1942 is exercised by the decedent by will. So what's included? The value of property that was appointed by exercising a general power of appointment in the decedent's will. And there's more, or by a disposition which is of such a nature that if it were a transfer of property owned by decedent, such property would be includable in decedent's gross estate under sections 2035 through 2038. Whoa, okay, this is a little bit trickier. Okay, so we said that we're going to include property that was subject to a power of appointment exercised by will. If the donee exercises the power of appointment during lifetime, however, we're only interested in those dispositions that if the donee had actually transferred the property, it would be one of these 2035 to 2038 things. So we're focusing on exercise of a power of appointment, not an outright transfer. Right? It would be one of those strings attached transfers we've been studying. Okay, not that kind of string. This is the Paganini quartet. And I think in the PowerPoint, if you click on this, it actually opens up one of their website. They're very funny. Okay, let's go back over here. Okay, so this would have been one of those strings attached transfers. So here's an example. I hereby exercise my general power of appointment by ordering the trustee to place $50,000 in a new trust, income to me for life, remainder to Alice and Bob. Okay, so if this were actually a transfer, what effect when I die? Did you say Section 2036 would bring the whole 50,000 corpus in? Sure, because I retained a life estate. I was really just exercising a power of appointment, but I did it in such a way that if it had been a transfer, we would have been pulling it in with one of those code sections. Now, was it a general power of appointment? Sure it was. All right, I was able to exercise it for myself. So it seems like I could have appointed it to anyone, and that means that if this were a pre-1942 power, this is the kind of exercise that would bring it back into my estate. So two things for those pre-1942 powers. Any exercise by will and any exercise during life with strings attached, right? A 2035 through 2038 kind of exercise. Different rule for the newer powers of appointment. It's a lot simpler. We don't care about exercise. Huh, what a relief, for the most part. To the extent of any property with respect to which the decedent has, at the time of his death, a general power of appointment. So now all we care about is, did decedent have a general power of appointment at death? That's enough. We don't need to exercise it in the will. We don't need to have exercised it at any point in the past. If you have the power at death, we include the property that you could appoint. Now, how's that different from Section 2038? Well, 2038, remember, only applied to powers over property that the decedent had actually transferred. 2041 applies to a general power of appointment even if the decedent never had a property interest in the underlying property. So this is a power of appointment that could be created by someone else. Oh wait, there's more. Okay, with the more recent powers, we also have the rule that says if you did exercise it and you don't now have it anymore, if you did exercise it but you did it in one of those strings attached kinds of way, then we will still include the property subject to the exercise. Okay, that's the only time that exercise is significant now. So, Section 2041, the gross estate includes the value of property subject to general powers of appointment created before 1942 if they were exercised by will or in a 2035 to 2038 sort of way. And the gross estate includes the value of property subject to a general power of appointment that was created after 1942 if the property is subject to the power at the date of death, and also applies to any property that was subject to a general power of appointment if the decedent exercised the power in a 2035 to 2038 sort of way. Now, I think I'll stop this one here. Module 8B will consider the next couple of cases. Thank you for watching.